Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Career Booster webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about thinking a bit beyond the MOS, selling the military skill set. Our discussion today is going to be a high-level overview of some of the tips and tricks that you'll need in order to polish your resume as you make your transition into the civilian workforce. To get started, some of the objectives for today, we're going to really talk about how your resume needs to speak to employer needs. We're going to discuss translating your military experience and training into a language that employers will understand. And we'll talk about ways to really showcase your track record of accomplishments to make yourself marketable in the civilian workforce. We will be taking questions. So if questions come up throughout the presentation, there is a feature within GoToWebinar that you can use. There's either the questions feature or the chat feature that you can use, and we'll monitor those to make sure your questions get answered beforehand. If not, you can always email us afterwards at careerservices@grantham.edu. But we welcome you to ask any questions that you have during this presentation. Also, this presentation is being recorded, so we will send recordings of these to all registrants and attendees once the presentation has ended. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our presenters today. First, we have on our Career Services team, we have Ms. Raylene Jones.
Hello, everyone. My name's Raylene. I work primarily with the students from the Mark Skousen School of Business and from the College of Arts and Sciences. My main role is to make sure that you are getting all the resources you need to successfully transition and assist you in meeting those career goals that you have.
All right, thanks, Raylene. And also joining us on our team is Doug Dimmler. Welcome, Doug.
Welcome. Thank you. I'm over the College of Engineering, Computer Science, Nursing, and Allied Health. I'm also the co-advisor for the GU SHRM student chapter here at Grantham University. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you. And rounding this out is myself, Jeremy Bell, Career Services Manager here with the Career Services team. So moving right along, we're going to start with Doug. When we talk about putting together a resume, what is really the purpose of a resume when we think of transitioning into a new position?
Jeremy, that's a good question. What we usually talk about is just getting the interview. That's what your resume is really for, is getting that interview. Mainly what we talk about with that is making sure that in the civilian area that you have everything that you need on your resume, that's not filled with like your federal resume, it's not filled with a lot of things that you put on there. It's just short and succinct and to the point. Other areas, of course, are having your key accomplishments and your qualifiers, and then of course, the skills that are needed for a new position. Make sure everything is organized and readable. It's very important.
Awesome. Raylene, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, Doug makes a great point that the purpose of the resume is to get an interview. And a lot of our military folks have an issue condensing their federal resume to a civilian resume. Now, the idea is to represent in a broad stroke, in a very clear and condensed manner, the reason why you are the best candidate for the interview, and then you go in detail further of your experience and your accomplishments in the interview. But that first step, it needs to be a very brief overview of your accomplishments.
Right, definitely. I would agree with that. We'll actually talk about that as we move along, but that's definitely a good point. So another question I would have, and Doug, maybe you can tackle this, is when it comes to the structure of a resume, I know sometimes we can have a lot of information on a document, as previously said, especially with some, federal resumes or even larger resumes. What are some ways to reduce some of the confusion when it comes to formatting and structuring a resume?
Well, a lot of things, if you're looking at an recruiter side of it for a company, they may get 30, 50, 100, 200, even more people per one job posting. So when they go through resumes, they scan through them very quickly. So that information that they scan has to be really short and to the point. Like I said before, there has to be important facts. Stay consistent so then they know what they're looking at. Once they start looking at a resume, they want it to be consistent. So if you list your job title first on every single job description that you put down, you'll want to do that. And we also suggest that as well. But You want to use clear defined sections, your headings, your subsections, or your subheadings, and then you also want to use some white space in there so they can easily jump from one section to the other, and it doesn't look like it's all bunched together. Consider using a type style other than New Times Roman. The one that's popular now is Calibri. So, but there's others, Arial, Tahoma Verdana. Those are the ones that are easily readable, easily scanned. And again, recruiters will go through these in seconds. It's amazing how adept they get at going through resumes that quickly. So the information that you provide really needs to be easily readable.
Right.
I have a
And
couple comments.
sure, go ahead.
So, Doug talked a little bit about font. When you think about Times New Roman, you can see that on the letter there is, at the end of the letter, there's sort of like a tail. Those type of fonts are harder to read than your non-tailed fonts, which would be Calibri, Verdana, Century, Gothic. So just keep that in mind too when you're picking your font, that you want it easy to read.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's definitely useful. And to Doug's earlier point with the amount of resumes that recruiters are going to get, we'll also talk about ways to really make your resume stand out because really, given the position that employers are are looking to fill, they may get hundreds, if not thousands, of resumes for only a handful of positions. So they're really going to go through them quickly. We hear anywhere from 15 to 30 seconds is going to be the amount of time that they scan through your resume. So you want to make sure that that key information is really easy to find and easy to read quickly because you only have a really short window to make an impression on them when they're going through those resumes. All right. So something else that we want to talk about is when you start developing your resume, the first thing we want to do is think about what your career goals and interests are. What kind of positions are you looking to apply for as you look to transition, and with that, that is going to take a little bit of self-assessment to think about your interests, your goals, and really what are your overall objectives. And for some folks, that's pretty easy to determine. For others, it might not be as much. So one of the things that we offer here at Grantham in Career Services is the opportunity to talk to our career services coordinators to really get a better idea of what that will look like. We offer assessments like our predictive index assessment. We've even done MBTI, the Myers-Briggs, to kind of help students get a better idea of what their career goals are. And once you have that target, you really want to think about what you've done within your history within the military or any other work experience that you've done that can help elevate you to that position. What kind of experience have you had up to this point that's going to make you more marketable? Think about what you've done in the military during your career. What titles have you had? What duties have you been responsible for? What tasks have you accomplished? And try to relate those to your overall career target because that's really what's going to be what makes a difference between getting the interview and not getting an interview is how well you're able to really showcase those accomplishments that you've had in your previous history and how you place them on your resume to make you the most marketable candidate. And those are, again, things that we can definitely help you with, here within Career Services, but it's really something that you should think about as far as, your history and how you can relate that moving forward. Some other things that you can use to kind of help you find those is to think about or even refer to, any performance evaluations that you've had, your training records, any decorations that you received while in the service. Those are going to be things that, again, are going to be valuable to you, as you build your plan of action for your career direction moving forward. So think about those things, and they'll definitely be helpful for you. One last thing that I would mention for that is using online skills translators. That's another great tool that our folks in the military and our veterans can use to kind of think about your history in the military and the work that you've done and how that can easily be translated into work in the civilian sector if you're looking to do the same thing. So I know military.com has a great military translator, and there's a few others that are available that we can definitely reference you to. But I definitely encourage you to look at some of those online translators if you have some questions as to what type of careers are going to be available to you once you transition. Um, that's kind of my take on that. Raylene or Doug, any additional thoughts you would have on that?
Well, I know I'll be talking a little bit more about those online skills translator later in the presentation, but I think that's a really big part of the resume when you're transitioning is really knowing where you want to go because you need to customize that resume to that career path.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I
I
think
would
the point
agree.
you made, Jeremy, about exploring who you are, it's best to always talk to somebody about that because we can, or that person that you talk to can pull out some key things that might be very important to a civilian type of position. So always try to use the resources around you.
Oh, definitely. I would agree with that. The next thing, kind of along those lines of, really knowing who you are and what you want to do, is once you've put that information together, to Doug's point, is you really want to highlight those skills and experiences for those positions that you're looking for. So, one of the things that we see with resumes that come through is that resume job descriptions really are, it's just a list of, it tends to be a list of duties and responsibilities. I was responsible for this, I was responsible for that. These are just my duties. But what recruiters are really wanting to see is, how you can highlight those skills, that are going to be relevant to them. So it's great to show what you've done, but we really want to see how those qualifications are going to be relevant to those upcoming opportunities. So those are some things that you really want to be able to focus on. And another big thing, that we'll talk about is the terminology. Another thing that we encounter on a regular basis, particularly with a military resume, is a lot of acronyms and jargon that may not be easily understood by someone outside of the military. So it's really important, to scan those resumes and really think about, okay, what of this information is going to be really understood by anyone other than the folks who I work with right now? And how can I either translate that into something that's going to be more easily understood, or determine if this is something that really even needs to be in my resume? So think about the civilian terminology as you're developing your resume, because that's going to be really helpful, when you apply for those positions, because you really want those civilian recruiters to really understand immediately what the work you've done moving forward. And then, just make sure, again, that your qualifications and skills and things are really on target with the opportunity at hand. So your resume is clear, direction and focus of your resume is really easily understood on that first read. Um, any additional points you guys like to add on that?
No, I think that was a great, summary of knowing who you are for the resume.
Okay, perfect. All right. So, moving a little bit more on the summary. So, as Raylene mentioned earlier, the summary of your resume, that's really the most one of the most important things that you are going to have in your resume. And every well written resume should have a summary statement at the beginning, just to show the recruiter in a clear and concise way who you are and what you bring to the table. No matter what kind of work that you're looking to do, this is something that needs to be clear, short, and information packed. To show, just what your most related credentials are. So depending on the position that you're looking for, you need to show that you have the skills to meet their needs. And this is something that needs to be brought up very early in the game. And those could be those hard skills. Maybe it's project management. Maybe if it's specific computer skills, or maybe if it's certain attributes that those employers are looking for. Those are things that can easily be plugged into your beginning statement to let them know what to expect from your resume. Another thing about the summary statement is it really should be a forecast of the information to follow. So if there are core competencies and skills that you'd like to highlight in that first part of your resume, you want to make sure that all the pieces moving forward will really be able to speak to that information that you intro your resume with. Um, the summary of your resume really doesn't need to be super long. I know you will see some examples where they can be rather lengthy professional summaries or objective statements, but really 4 to 5 lines of content maximum is good, as long as the information is very concrete and targeted to your career objective or the objective of the position. You should be in good shape with that. Um, the next slide here, I'm going to give you just a brief example of what I'm talking about when I think of a summary statement. So, and I'll go ahead and read this out for those who might not be looking at your computer. And the summary example would be: a top-performing network systems professional with 4 years of experience in computer installation, configuration, troubleshooting, desktop support, and network management. Proven network maintenance manager with excellent customer service ratings. Currently possessing a DoD secret security clearance. So this is an example of a summary statement that's very clear, to the point, three sentences max, that tells the reader exactly what your main proficiencies are, from your computer technical skills to even some of the more soft skills that would be related, such as troubleshooting and the customer service elements. But those are things that you really want to highlight very soon at the beginning of your resume. Um, Doug,
Yeah,
Raylene, any additional thoughts on the summary?
the only thing that I would add is that if you are a veteran, that is a hiring initiative that people are looking for. So if I would add that to this first sentence as well: top performing network systems professional and veteran with 4 years of experience, just because that's already going to put you above other candidates for the position.
Doug, I think your mute is on.
Doug,
Okay, sorry about that. I got a little muted there, but we'll move forward here. So the next thing we want to talk about is the education section of your resume. And so, what we'd want to really talk about here is just when it comes to a military resume, what's the best way to put together the education section of your resume? So, as you can see with the example here, it's pretty straightforward when it comes to information that you should include. Um, so you want to have a succinct facts-only description of your educational credentials, certifications, and any specific relevant training. So as you can see here in the example, we have your degree, the area in which your degree was received. So you have an MBA, Business Administration from Grantham University. If you want to include your GPA, you can do so. However, we only recommend doing so if your GPA is 3.5 or higher. So if it's not, for some reason, I wouldn't recommend including it. However, it is, you're more than welcome, although it is not required. You always want to include the location where your degree was earned and the year in which it was earned. And again, with the year, more so for recent grads, but if you've been out of school for a while, you may not necessarily need to include the year that you've earned your degree. But that's kind of one of those things that is adjustable. But so again, just to recap some things in your education session, you want to first be able to list your academic degrees if you have them, including any 2-year associates, bachelor's, and master's. Include each distinction, even if you've haven't completed the program yet. So, for example, if you're currently working on your degree program, it's perfectly okay to say or list your degree as expected completion spring of 2009 or expected completion March of 2019. That's perfectly okay if you haven't completed your degree yet. So you still want to include your degree, but you can just let them know when you expect to complete it. And the last thing, just be sure to include the course of study, the institution, and completion dates again. Raylene, any additional thoughts you would have as far as the education section goes?
yeah, I just have one thought. So, MBA, most people are going to know what that means when they read it. I mean, all people are going to know. But if the job description says Masters of Business Administration and it's looking for those words, I would add that as well. Masters of Business Administration, then have MBA. Um, so same for, your BS, put Bachelor of Science and then, BS. Include both just because it's possible that an applicant tracking system, which is the software that automatically scans your resume, it's possible that it might not read BS if it's looking for Bachelor of Science. So I would just include both. That's my opinion.
Okay,
Yeah, I
perfect.
totally agree. I think you should spell out the MBA and the BS or the BA or whatever that is. Go ahead and spell that out. Um, and the GPA, if you're having like say in your master's program, you're having your GPA that's above a 3.5, and then in your bachelor's program you didn't have above a 3.5. That's okay. However, let's say you didn't achieve that in your master's 3.5 and you did in your undergrad. I just wouldn't list that. Um, I would just go ahead and leave it off of both because it looks like you accomplished that 3.5 in your bachelor's degree, but in your master's you couldn't quite achieve that. So I would just go ahead and leave that off unless they're specifically asking for your your GPA.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, I think that those are good points, is that these issues and situations are going to be pretty, they're going to vary. So it's really good to have a conversation with our team, for those specific reasons, so we can kind of tailor the resume to your specific situations, because it is going to vary from person to person. So it's always good to keep those things in consideration. Um, so we're going to move over to the next section of the resume, which is going to be our work experience. So, Raylene, I'm going to throw this over to you. So, when writing a military resume work section, what are some things that we should consider?
Well, first of all, the experience section of your resume is one of the most difficult sections. One, because it's very hard to write down what you've been doing on a daily basis, and it's even harder to pull out the relevant stuff versus the day to day duties that may not mean as much for that next position. So it's difficult, but it is the most important section of your resume. This is the piece that is going to qualify you for that next position. There are several formats to, list your experience. A very common one is chronological, which is, you're listing your job experience in reverse chronological order. So the job you're currently in is at the top, then the job before that is next. And, you just have each position separate. There's also another format called a functional resume, which would have your skills based all at the top. So say, you've moved up you've received a promotion, but there's a major overlap in your daily duties. Instead of repeating that under both job titles, you can do a giant skills section, list those skills together with subheaders, and then briefly mention the job title and position. But there's also a third resume format, which is the combination resume format. This is the one that I mostly use with my um, trans, um, my transitioning military students, just because it gives a really distinct view of the skills that you've earned in each position. So it'd be similar to what you see on the screen here. You'd have your jobs listed separately, and then in the bulleted section, you would group your skills together in subheaders. Um, so that's really my take on the experience section. If you're having difficulties putting that down on paper, please come to us. Me and Doug, we do this every day. We'd love to look at your resume and give you our advice on that.
Cool.
Yeah, I would have to agree. The two most common ones are the chronological and the combination. The functional resume is really something that's used very sparingly, but I would have a professional help you with that. I'd have a professional help you with the chronological and the combination, but those are the two that I do agree with Raylene on that are two of the most resumes that we use.
Yeah, the what I would add to that really with regards to which type of resume to use is the functional resume. Now, the reason why it's probably not the best choice for your resume is one is it really only highlights the skills that you've had within certain areas. There's not a whole lot of focus on the experience that you've had within your work history. So the functional resume may come in handy for those who may have garnered a lot of skills but may not have garnered as much work experience in certain areas, and some other times it comes into play well if you're going into a completely new position or type of field that also you may not have a whole lot of work history in as well. The problem that it poses for recruiters is that they're really not getting the full picture of your work experience, and that's really what that's really what they're wanting to see. They want to see the experience behind the skills and how you're going to be able to tie that into the current opportunity. And it may bring up questions as to any gaps or information that may be missing or even hidden from your resume. So just to piggyback off of Doug and Raylene said, really the combination resume is the best format to use, with the chronological being a close second in my opinion.
Yeah, and I just have one more note that I forgot to mention. The information that you put in this section should be results oriented, it should be measurable. You should have plenty of numbers to really solidify your qualification, your experience. And on top of that, you should also make sure that you are showing a career ladder through your experience, which is why the chronological and combination are plus, and the functional, because it's not focused on that career ladder, your history from job to job. That's why it's not as preferred by those recruiters, because they can't see that transition as easily.
Right. I would agree. Anything else we'd like to add as far as work experience is concerned? All right, then we will move on. So, the next thing we're going to talk about, along the lines of what Raylene had mentioned, as far as really showing and highlighting your accomplishments, we're going to talk about the concept of selling versus just telling. And I'll let Doug kind of talk about this a little bit. So, what would you think we mean by selling versus telling when it comes to a resume, Doug?
Well, I love this section. Sell it, don't just tell it, because it's really transitioning from what you did in the military to the civilian talk that we have. You can manage personnel and equipment during 6 months overseas deployment. That's exactly what you've done. But really, what you did was you direct a team of 45 electricians or mechanics, and you've maintained more than 30 million in equipment, and then you've achieved and maintained 100% in inventory accuracy. Now, when you say it like that, which is what you've done, it may not be those exact numbers, obviously, but when you talk to a hiring manager or recruiter, or if they see that on your resume, you're going to stand out, because not a lot of civilians can back those kind of numbers up. So anytime that you get a chance to talk in those kind of the quantifying numbers, and you're telling a story now, you're selling yourself on paper, that's what really is what's going to make you stand out.
And I heard you were going to say telling a story. I think you really are telling a story, with your work experience. I think that's what these should really do for the recruiter, is paint a real broad picture of just what your responsibilities were. And I would totally agree with that. That I think, telling someone as much detail about the work, I think that's something that we see common in this scenario, is just to say, well, tell me what you did at your last job. Well, I drove a truck. But what you're really not saying is just what Doug mentioned, is not only did I drive a truck, but I managed a team of, 30 plus personnel with responsibilities of millions of dollars worth of equipment, and no room for error. So it's really important that you sell that in your resume. Raylene, any additional points you would add to that?
I'm sorry, I was muted. That just relates directly to what I was saying. These items need to be measurable. Managed personnel, yeah, that's impressive, but when you've managed 45 employees, that really solidifies that experience that you've had.
And I want to mention some people haven't directed a team of 45. It could be five, but still you're quantifying those things. Now it may not be 30 million. It may be 500,000. But always those things are those things. Those things are in your part of your MOS description, and so you're really you're describing your benefits, you're stating the how and why, and then you're including results and details. Very, very important.
Yeah, and I think this ties back to the earlier point about self assessment. I think as you start developing your resume, whether it be your summary statement, your education, especially your work experience, I think along the way it's important to try to keep as much of a record of what you've done as possible. So when it comes to writing this portion of your resume, it really should flow nicely if you track that information in your evaluations and your training records and employee records should help you paint a picture of that. But I think having a real good understanding of just really how much value that you're adding to the position is going to be helpful when you write these up because as Raylene and Doug mentioned, it's really, you want to show how you've saved money, how you've saved time, but you really want to show, how your efforts have made the work better. So really just what value are you adding to these positions? So it's not really enough just to say, I managed this and I did this. This is what I did to really make this job better, and this is why the position was better for having me in it. That's one thing I would add to that.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect point. Anytime you can show that you save time and money and how you use that time and money is perfect. So great analogy there. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is something I feel, and I think the team feels as well, is keywords. We hear this a lot when it comes with resumes, especially when it comes to applying for certain positions, and making sure that we're, putting the best foot forward when we seek these new opportunities and speaking to the language of the opportunity. So, Raylene, can you tell us a little bit what you think when it comes to keywords on a resume and how we go about applying for positions?
Yes, of course. So, the world is always changing, but in our current hiring state as a nation, most, if not all, companies are using applicant tracking systems to scan resumes and decide whether a resume or a candidate is qualified based on the words that are included in that resume. So this goes back to what Jeremy was talking about. Having that identified career path selected, because if you don't, it's going to be difficult to identify what keywords you need to include. So if you have the job position selected, you can easily find, using these online translators, the type of competencies that are wanted and desired for that type of position. What this is doing is it's taking, especially your military experience, it's taking that language and translating it to recruiter friendly language. We talked earlier about acronyms. Well, military acronyms, there's many of them. Civilians aren't going to know what those acronyms mean. So translating those to civilian and recruiter language is going to be a key piece of your resume. Um, some different translators that we use, vets.gov, onet, military.com, JobScan. If you're looking for a specific position, say project manager, and you're not sure what exactly the core competencies are for that position, go to ONET because they have a great resource there. It's about halfway down the page. If you were to type in the title, it tells you the skills that are desired and needed for that position. There's a lot of other great information on there as well, but that's a good start for you to know exactly what people are looking for that position. And JobScan is another one that's very useful. You can, on their site, take the job description and take your resume and you copy and paste it in, and it will evaluate your resume based on the keywords in the job description. And it will rate you on how well you've done in articulating that you can do this position. And that goes into the next slide, is, keyword examples. Making sure that you are listing the right word for what you've done. So, say you've done operations management. Well, there could be other words that that applicant tracking system is looking for, like materials management, inventory control, project management, production planning, process engineering. So, and I say this with training as well. If you've done training, what are the other key words that are related to training? Needs assessment, instructional programming. I can read through these, but basically, what the main key points that I'd like you to take away from this is that there are many words to describe the one thing that you've done. You need to pick out those keywords from the job description, from the resources, JobScan, ONET, vets.gov, to make sure that you are hitting the right target words for that position. And I think we have a sample job posting to look at. So one of the first places to start, of course, is the job description. When you're identifying whether you have the skills for this position and how to write that you've done what the job description is asking for. So when you have this job description, you'll see different sections: core responsibilities, qualifications. I would recommend that if you are familiar with something that's listed here, circle or highlight or make a list of all the things that you have done before from that job description. And then take those words and insert them into various points in your resume. This includes, your, skills and abilities that relate to this. It includes, if it says bachelor's degree, this is another reason why I say write out bachelor's, because it's going to be looking specifically for that word. And use action verbs. You don't just want to say did this. You want to say, did this well. You want to use a verb that is describing what you've done in a way that makes you look good and is results oriented, because that's what companies want. They want to know how you save them time, how you'll save them money. And then, of course, include technical skills. This job description on the screen is for a software technical writer. So there's a lot of software that's mentioned here: Microsoft Word, Adobe Photoshop, Dreamweaver. Create a section at the bottom of your resume that has a list of all of these software that you have done, that you're competent in using, and that's going to make sure that you are hitting the right numbers when they're matching your resume to the job description in their applicant tracking systems. That's everything I had for that section. Doug or Jeremy, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think that really keywords are so important. If you don't have them in there, and the company's using an applicant tracking system, which almost all of them use nowadays, your resume will never be looked at by a human. Seriously, it's just that way. So it's really important that you get these keywords into your resume, so at least they'll move on to the next section of having a recruiter look at it. Now, when a recruiter looks at it, you might have a frontline recruiter or an HR generalist person looking at this who may not know anything about the position. All they're doing is looking into the resume a little bit more to see if they can move you on to the next person that can look at it. And that person may be a hiring manager, or it might be another HR manager type of person. But you'll always want to make sure you're able to move to the next section, and keywords are really, really important for that.
Cool. The only other thing that I would add to that, there's actually a great analogy that I heard someone share at a previous event that we were at, and it was so simple. It was surprising how simple this was, but it was kind of going back to the JobScan website. But this was really a matter of just like taking the position that you're applying for and putting it right next to your resume, and really it's just a matter of playing the match game. So you want to match, just as Raylene mentioned before, think about the responsibilities that are required in this position. And then if you want to just draw a line or even a mental line to your resume, try to make sure that those things are all on your resume. And if they're not on your resume, if those requirements and skills and qualifications aren't on your resume that job is asking for, then that means that you're going to have some work to do. So if you've got those skills and they just aren't on the resume, then you need to make sure they're on the resume. However, we're not, you want to be honest. So, if you don't have those skills and qualifications, then we need to do a little bit of reevaluation. But the main point I want to make is, what everyone said here is just make sure you understand the job description. Make sure that you've read the job description carefully, so therefore you can, customize your resume accordingly. So I invite you, and I know Doug and Raylene invite you to definitely share your resume with us, share the opportunities that you're targeting with us, so that we can work with you to customize your resume to make you, as much of a viable candidate as possible. So definitely share those with us so we can help customize that for you. The last thing I wanted to definitely go over before we end our presentation is just some ideas for proofreading. Proofreading is the most important thing that you're going to do when it comes to your resume. You definitely, we've talked about, writing a summary section. We've talked about your education section, your work experience. But one of the things that throws candidates out of the running for positions more than anything is failure to proofread. So, the first thing you want to do is really, take a look at your resume. Look, how does it look? Does this look like a polished document that you want to share with a potential employer? So think about, those things that we mentioned earlier, as far as white space, how your format looks, what kind of fonts you use. Is it easy to read? Is it easy to get through clearly without a lot of confusion? Consider your spacing and consistency of your resume with your fonts and things like that. Your personal information, you want to make sure all of that is correct. You don't want to leave any room for error when it comes to whether or not people will be able to contact you or not for a position. I know I've gotten questions as far as whether or not to include your street address or whether or not to include, every phone number. I think you should include your street address because one, I never know for sure how a recruiter is going to contact me. I know generally, email and phone is one way that's most popular for people to connect with potential candidates. However, you don't want to leave anything out of the running. So include your street address. I would also include your LinkedIn profile on your resume. That's another great way for recruiters to connect with you. Now, that being said, with LinkedIn, you want to make sure that your information is consistent. So whatever information that you include on your resume, you want to make sure that it is consistent with your LinkedIn profile. And we can definitely help work with you to make sure that those things are in sync. Again, check for consistency within your resume, and that can be additionally making sure you're using the current tense. And by that, I mean sometimes what I'll see is, for current positions, you want to make your tense to show that I'm currently doing this. However, sometimes we look at previous positions, that tense needs to change. So you want to make sure that you're using your past and present tense accordingly when it comes to current and previous positions. Grammar and punctuation. Always make sure to check for your grammar and punctuation on your resume. Spelling, all those types of things. You want to make sure those things have been reviewed thoroughly because, again, like I said, you only get a chance to make a first impression once, and a lot of times if recruiters or employers will see even the smallest of grammatical error, it's very easy for them to put you out of the running because it shows a lack of attention to detail. Something else that we've seen and that some may not consider to be a big deal, but it kind of is the number usage. And the only thing I'll say on that is when you use numbers and statistics in your resume, it's a good rule of thumb that any numbers between 1 to 10 be spelled out, or excuse me, 1 to 9 be spelled out, and use the actual number symbols for numbers of 10 or larger. And then weak points. When I think of weak points, I think of any information that may not be relevant to your resume. Is there any information on your resume that may not be needed? And that could be positions that may be not directly related to your career target goal, maybe positions that may have been pretty for pretty far in the past, and our good rule of thumb is to only go back about 10 to 15 years as far as work history is concerned. Anything further than that may not be relevant. So consider any information that may not be relevant, and that could also include any specific military training or military accommodations that may not be directly related to your target position. Something that I see pretty frequently is, we may get a lot of awards and a lot of recognition and have a lot of training when it comes to military, but look a little closely at it just to think, is all of this relevant to my job target? Um, and then the last point I would make is just to test drive your document. First and foremost, definitely share it with us here in Career Services. We want to, work with you, make sure it is where it needs to be: proofreading, structure, format, relevancy, etc. But share it with your friends. I know one of the things that's common is we don't always share our resume or have other people look at our resume, but the more you share your resume, the more insight you're going to get as to some corrections or revisions that are going to help your resume to make it the best polished document possible. So I definitely encourage you to not only share it with us, but share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it with your contacts, anyone that's a major stakeholder in helping you get to where you want to be career wise. So those are some final things that I would add as far as proofreading. Anything that you guys would like to add?
I do have one more comment. I don't think we really talked about this. Maybe Doug covered it earlier, but your civilian resume should be 2 pages or less, which is difficult for a lot of our people that come from federal work or the military. They have federal resumes can be pretty lengthy. In the civilian world, 2 pages, 1 page even is what the recruiter is going to want to look at.
Yeah, and I think as far as covering the whole section of proofreading, let's say you get past, the applicant tracking system, you get past that first HR generalist or the frontline recruiter, and it happens to get to a hiring manager. If your proofreading isn't right and you're being compared to another applicant who has a near perfect or perfect resume, it's going to put you out of the running. If there's too many grammatical errors, punctuation, spellings, they're going to look at that and say, I really don't want this person working for me. I'd rather have this other person. So really, when you get down to it, looking at the whole process, proofreading is super important when it comes down to 2 or 3 people.
Hmm. I personally I feel like it's probably the most important thing that you can do. I mean, it's when you're thinking of a position where that recruiter is looking at, it could be 3 candidates, it could be 300 candidates, and they're probably looking at, whatever reasons they can to put take someone off the list so they can, make their choice easier and whittle that 300 person down. So, you don't want to miss that opportunity because of grammar or punctuation. So proofreading is key. Um, but again, we definitely, invite everyone listening to, share your resume with us. That's what we're here for. We want to, help polish your resume and make it what it needs to be. Um, and that pretty much brings us to the end of our presentation. Any final thoughts or words of wisdom, Doug, Raylene?
No, I would just strongly encourage. I know Jeremy just invited you all, but I would strongly encourage that you come to us and have us review your resume to make sure that it's in top shape.
Yeah, I agree. I think having a professional take a look at your resume is the key point here. But there's this information in this slide deck is really a great tool for you to use.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add additionally is that this is an ongoing process. I know, we'll spend a lot of time working on our resumes to make sure it's, this is exactly what I need to get that position I want, but it is not an overnight thing. It is something that you will constantly want to work towards polishing, both on your own and with the help of your career services coordinators. Definitely, take advantage of this, and we, want you to take advantage of this opportunity. Before we end, I definitely want to let everyone know about our Career Launch program. This is a great, comprehensive, and interactive program that we've developed for all our students and alumni and partners at Grantham University, and it will help you not only establish your career direction, but it will give you some valuable tips and tools on creating professional resumes and cover letters, even helping you with your interview skills. There's salary negotiation, information about professional associations and organizations that you want to be involved in, and a lot more. And it's a free service here at Grantham University. And if you're interested in taking advantage of this program, it's self-paced. So you can do it in your own time. We invite you to call us at the number listed here. It's 1-800-955-2527, extension 173, or you can email us at careerservices@grantham.edu to register for Career Launch or to ask us any other questions that you have with regards to your career destination. We'd be glad to help. But that's going to conclude our presentation for today, and I thank everyone for attending, and we'll talk to you soon.